Happy New Year! I hope you've had a beautiful holiday season, taking some time to reflect on your journey over the last year. Now, as many are turning their gaze toward what they want to create in this new year, this episode is my invitation to you. 2026, 2 plus 0 plus 2 plus 6 is 10, which is 1, is a 1 year of new beginnings. We're starting a new 9-year cycle, so 2025 was the completion of the last 9-year cycle. Anything that's not meant to come forward with you has probably been coming up to the surface to get your attention. It could be old stories, habits, and versions of you. It could be investments in situations, projects, or people that are no longer aligned with your vision, who you're becoming, and where you're going. In this episode, we're going to explore one of the key areas where people tend to get stuck after relational traumas, such as abuse, neglect, betrayal, and abandonment. And that includes collective traumas like what's happened since 2020. I estimate that about 97% of people who wake up to the abuse in their personal lives are struggling to move beyond this point. I've noticed the same trend in health and freedom communities. People are awake to the abuse at the global level, yet still disempowered but don't realize it because knowledge is often confused with power, and awareness is often confused with liberation. They know the facts, they see the matrix, but they haven't metabolized the rupture. They're still outsourcing sovereignty to the very energies they've awakened from. When we blame, we regress to a childlike state reminiscent of when we didn't have any agency and choice. We just had to adapt to survive. Yet as adults, prolonged blame traps our willpower in a feedback loop of helplessness and powerlessness. Blame protects the part of us that is still afraid of freedom. Because if we step into true freedom, we lose the fantasy of being rescued. The inner child is still dreaming of resolution through external validation. The child doesn't need to be scolded, but held. The child is waiting for the adult to choose and lead the way. Blame protects the tender hope that someone is coming to fix it, that justice will come, that the ones who hurt us will repent, return, or repair the damage. But freedom says, that may never happen, and I choose liberation anyway. My New Year invitation to you is to discover any remaining areas of your life where you want to shed the old stories of victimhood so you can liberate yourself and thrive. This episode is the 5th portal in this 9-part mini-series on the emotional and behavioral anchors that weigh us down in life. I'll invite you to witness where blame is a placeholder for which you haven't yet felt, so you can liberate yourself from this anchor that's holding you down in your life and relationships. When we release blame and shed the old stories of victimhood, we reclaim our creative authorship over our lives. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is Where Blame Ends, Freedom Begins. If you're one of the people looking around and wondering why nothing has felt the same since 2020 and what you can do about it, check out my book, Becoming Whole: How to Prevent Stockholm Syndrome and Transcend Darkness in Your Life and Relationships. Becoming Whole is for people who want to break free from the state of captivity and liberate their soul from the learned helplessness caused by the ongoing psychological and spiritual warfare in our world, so they can thrive during these challenging times, restore inner wholeness and freedom, and create a better future for the next generations instead of passing this burden forward. Podcaster Doc Malik described it as the book everyone needs to stay free, a work of art and an absolute masterpiece. Check out Becoming Whole by Meredith Miller, available in paperback, Kindle, or audiobook format. Let's face it, sometimes we just don't have the energy to do the inner work. That's why I want to tell you about a little device that you can use to self-regulate your nervous system with the click of a few buttons during intense moments when you just need relief so you can function or sleep. It's called the Vibe. I've been using much more complicated and costly frequency devices for almost 20 years. I was blown away when I saw how affordable this device is and how easy it is to use. It puts sovereign wellness back in the hands of the people. This little pocket device uses frequencies to relieve symptoms like anxiety, inflammation, neck pain, back pain, fibromyalgia, headaches, irritability, depression, brain fog, insomnia, heart issues, and more. You can use it on your dogs, cats, and horses too. It's based on technology with a 98% success rate in alleviating the symptoms of post-trauma. Your search for PEMF on PubMed will yield hundreds of scientific studies revealing its potential benefits. If you want to get your vibe, you'll find the link to this affordable device in the show notes. That's where you can listen to the interview I did with the rocket scientist who developed it. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. Information provided is for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as medical advice for preventing, diagnosing, curing, or treating any disease. Consult a qualified professional for any questions specific to your health and well-being. What we blame holds our power. We limit our empowerment, healing, and liberation when we stay stuck in the blame. Yet it's tricky though, because it feels empowering to point the finger at those who hurt or disappoint us, at those who are committing crimes against humanity, at those who are serving the dark forces knowingly or unknowingly. But blaming is false empowerment. That's why it only brings a temporary relief to blame others. And it's addictive. Peter Crone says we can never get enough of something that almost works. It's not wrong to recognize that harm was done. In fact, that's an important phase of the early healing process. But it's exactly that, a phase in the early part of the process. If you stay stuck there in the victimhood, instead of moving through the healing journey, it will hold you back from creating what you really want in life. Over time and continually reinforcing that story, the victimhood becomes woven into the fabric of our reality and identity. It feels like part of life and who we are, but it doesn't have to be. This is by far one of the most unsavory truths to swallow in the healing journey. It's one we'll turn away from until we're ready to truly empower and liberate ourselves. And that doesn't usually happen until we get to the point when we're sick and tired of feeling powerless, so we're willing to do something different. If you're not there yet, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. That's just where you are on your journey right now. I spent almost 38 years of my life living in the powerlessness of victim consciousness. And then I went back into it in 2020 when all things COVID began. For the next few years, I became focused on what they were doing to us. Most of my days were spent thinking about that, doing research about that, talking about that with others. And I wasn't wrong about it, but I was giving my power away without realizing it. Eventually, I got sick and tired of feeling like that. And in retrospect, I realized that my seeming setback was actually my invitation to go back into the trenches of powerlessness so I could learn more about that state and finally outgrow it. Then share those codes with those who are ready to give themselves permission to be free. I learned that the victim story is incompatible with empowerment, healing, and liberation. But when we're in that state, we forget that what we blame holds our power. We project and cast the pain outward when what's inside feels too difficult to face. That feels like momentary relief, a temporary high. But inevitably, the state of superiority flips back into inferiority, and we keep looping in the pain, recreating more situations in which we feel like a victim. Bedros Keuilian says the biggest psyop on humanity is the endorsement and promotion of victim mentality. He posted recently that this is the biggest obstacle between where you are and where you want to be. There is no faster way to destroy your will and stop your progress. Victim mentality is emotionally protective, cognitively efficient, and socially reinforced, which is why most who carry it don't even realize it. Now that's coming from a man who openly speaks about the abuse he experienced in childhood. When he was young, he was brought to America from the communist country where he grew up. It's not that he never felt like a victim, but he overcame the poverty and oppression of evil in his personal life. Now he teaches others how to create empowerment and abundance in their life and business. As I wrote in Becoming Whole, victimhood is a stage, not a life sentence. It's a state of consciousness, not an identity. Yet there are so many political, social, and spiritual campaigns with the goal of keeping people in the victimhood. The darkness wants our attention and energy. Blame isn't clarity, it's a distraction. Blame isn't liberation, it's bondage. Yet it might feel really good in the moment when we're blaming someone or something else. This is how the dark force tricks us into consenting to stay in the darkness. Blaming delays us from liberating ourselves from the state of captivity, which is the only way that we can actualize the unique divine purpose that God has ordained for us. Everything the darkness does is to lead us away from God, from who we really are, and the mission that we were anointed to create in this world. So the darkness wants to get us obsessed with it. And when we center others, we give away our power to them. You'll hear the term centering in dating content, for example. People will say, stop centering men or stop centering women. It means to stop focusing on them, to stop obsessing over them, to stop giving your power away to them, to stop blaming them, to stop feeling like a victim to them, and take your power back. We can replace them with anything else, the global mafia, the psychopaths, the demons, or anyone else that we're centering our attention on. It can even be a little thing, like something someone says or does on the road or at the grocery store, and we can end up investing an entire afternoon or even days thinking about it. If you're really honest, what are you giving your power away to? What we focus on grows. Have you given any thought to what you want to grow in your life this year and beyond? That's where you want to invest your time and energy. I would suggest you take some time to reflect and journal on that. And not just because it's the new year. This is a great question to bring to the table every day to continually recalibrate yourself toward building the life you actually desire. People often say, but I don't have the time for that. It's not that you don't have the time. It's that you have other priorities where you're investing your time. Sometimes people say they're just too exhausted. And it's not that you don't have enough energy to create the life you want. It's just that you're sending your energy somewhere else through your thoughts, and probably without realizing it. So first, we identify where our attention and energy is going. What percentage of your day do you spend thinking about what others did or do to you? That includes both on a personal level as well as what's happening in the world. Include your scrolling activities online, the content you consume, and the conversations you have with others as well as with yourself in your inner dialogue. What percentage of your day would you estimate that you spend thinking about what others did or do to you? Is it 30%? 50%? 80%? All of that is time, energy, and focus that could be repurposed from destruction to creation, from victimhood to liberation, from misery to purpose. If you're someone awakening to the evils in our world, you probably spend a lot more time focused on that than you realize. This is very common. It might be giving you a sense of safety to do that, but it's not real safety, and you might not realize what the trade-off is. One of the dirtiest tricks that evil plays is to tempt you to feed it with your energy and focus. Would you like to know that you can be aware that evil exists, that you can have the discernment to recognize evil and liberate yourself from it? I saw a powerful quote recently from an anonymous source. Imagine being bitten by a snake, but instead of focusing on healing from the poison, you chase the snake to understand why it bit you and to prove that you didn't deserve it. I wish I'd seen that years ago. It puts everything into perspective about the victim's state of consciousness. We can waste valuable time and energy in those kinds of ruminations, which take us on a detour from healing. Meanwhile, the wound keeps festering and nothing changes for the better internally or in our world. Blame reinforces the past and blocks the future. Energetically, blame freezes the moment of pain into identity. It delays healing because it reinforces the same stories and emotional scaffolding through which we experience life. We hope for a new future, but inevitably it's just more of the same when we're stuck in the blame. Blaming is actually related to the hypervigilance that often comes with the post-trauma. Hypervigilance is an adaptation that trains us to look for the past recurring in the present. It serves the purpose of making us feel safe and assured that the past can't happen again, but it also keeps us trapped in looping cycles of similar experiences because when we look for the past through the law of assumption, it just keeps happening in different ways. There are healthier ways to prevent the past from repeating itself. So if we return to our snake analogy, of course, it's good to know about snakes. That's a life skill when you're out in nature where there are venomous snakes. It's important to know how to recognize them and to avoid areas where they tend to hide. It's also important to take care of your own space so you don't provide unintentional places for snakes to hang out. If you live in the South, when the leaves start falling in autumn, you got to clean up the leaves quickly. You don't want to let them build up because that's an ideal place for a copperhead to camouflage itself. Likewise, if you want to avoid providing a welcome environment for snakes, it's not responsible to let debris and junk build up on your property, or to let the grass grow tall and unruly where you can't see what's hiding under there. So prevention is partly about awareness and partly about discipline. Both are important, because awareness is useless if you aren't disciplined about putting it into practice. It's important to be able to recognize evil and turn away from it, externally and internally. This is part of our spiritual work. If we only see the evil out there, we'll always feel like a victim to it. But when we turn our gaze inward, we can recognize the ways in which we're tempted to indulge in what Dante called disordered love, pride, lust, envy, wrath, gluttony, sloth, and greed. That's where spiritual discipline and the liberation of the soul takes place. God gave us the authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome the power of the enemy so that nothing will harm us. That means the creator of all that is doesn't want us to suffer or get stuck in the victimhood. So why do we go through painful experiences? I believe it's part of our learning and growth process that prepares us for our mission. The pain is an attention grabber. It awakens us from our slumber, gradually revealing our conditioning and bringing our awareness to the power of choice. And when we can no longer tolerate the pain, that's when we finally become self-honest to see how we're participating in our reality. Yet life doesn't always have to be hard and painful. Once we make the inner shift, applying our self-awareness to our spiritual discipline, we can start learning and growing through more inspiration, ease, and grace, instead of having to learn the hard way, no matter what's going on around us. It's a choice to get stuck in the pain and blame, or to allow new purpose to be created from it. But it may not feel like a choice from where you are right now because you are programmed to navigate life that way. You'll know what choice you're currently making based on the story you're telling yourself about what happened. That's why the key is to listen to the story you're telling in your inner dialogue. Once you hear it, then you'll notice that old story has a heavy gravitational pull. Reaching escape velocity will require the willingness to be honest with yourself. And the more honest you are with yourself, the more you'll be able to liberate yourself. And if you aren't able to be radically honest with yourself, you're going to keep choosing to stay in the victimhood. You're going to sabotage your healing because it feels safer to stay where you are. When our story is telling us that we feel betrayed by someone else, if we want to shift out of the disempowerment of blame, we can look within ourselves to see where we betrayed ourselves and our values before the external betrayal happened. That doesn't mean the external betrayal didn't happen. That is one layer of the truth, yet it's limited to the victim perspective. Seeing the bigger picture of truth means a more complete version of the story, and one that can lead to empowerment and liberation. This isn't about self-blame. It's about self-honesty. And self-honesty is the antidote to blame, because it restores our agency so we can make new choices. When we look out in the world and see so much deception, so many lies, and we get stuck in the story of blaming those who are deceiving and telling lies, those who are trying to keep humanity in a state of captivity, it's not that that's not true, but again, it's one layer of truth, and it's the victim's story. The bigger picture of truth is when we can look inside ourselves to see the little or big ways that we're deceiving or lying to ourselves, the ways that we're participating in our own victimhood. Because if we're living in a world where deception and lies are ruling for so long and we feel like a victim to that, it's because we're doing the same within ourselves in different ways. About the marriage that's not working, but you want to believe it is because you don't want to be alone. Or the soul-sucking job that's softly killing you a little more each day, but you like the paycheck. Or the ways in which you're playing small, instead of stepping into your authenticity and activating your divine mission because you don't want to rock the boat. Or feel the judgment and disapproval of those around you who feel comfortable with your smallness. Again, this isn't about self-blame. It's about self-honesty. Self-honesty opens the path to a new future of possibilities and opportunities. So if you're feeling courageous to see your patterns more honestly, let's look at the scaffolding that victimhood creates in our survival patterns, our stories, and identity. The subtle inner architecture of blame. Blame is a protective reflex when the nervous system is overwhelmed by helplessness, injustice, and powerlessness. Blame is a placeholder for unmetabolized grief, the unclaimed authority of choice, and unmet needs from childhood, a resonance that repeats through life until we cross the threshold of empowerment. Blame forms a temporary structure of meaning when life feels unfair. But it doesn't help us heal. It doesn't liberate us. And it doesn't restore our coherence. It just projects our fragmentation outward and forward. Blame guards the gate of the liberated self. Not the self who's informed, but the self who's activated. So let's explore how the blame is serving us as a survival mechanism, what we get out of the stories of victimhood that we're telling ourselves, and how to access the part of ourselves that is already activated, empowered, and liberated without having to do or prove anything. The survival brain. This part of you is trying to feel safe and survive. It's automated and probably happening without your awareness. It's the primal adaptation. These are your primal defense mechanisms. And the survival brain is also very connected to your inner child. Common survival responses are hypervigilance, suspicion, paranoia, heart walls, barbed wire around the heart, coldness and hardness, control, performance, avoidance, fighting, ruminating, withdrawing, shutting down. To shift out of the survival brain adaptations, we can first validate, how is it trying to help you survive or feel safe? How did that pattern serve you? So for example, How did it serve me to have heart walls? Well, the walls around my heart made me feel safe. It was the only way to survive the pain of childhood abuse and neglect. It was the intelligent response at the time. The ego. This part of you is telling yourself the story about what happened. It's where victimhood has become woven into your identity. It's your ego that's stuck in the blame and uses it as a more sophisticated defense strategy. Some common ego habits: flipping between states of superiority and inferiority, grandiosity and shame, or pride and shame, win, lose. The ego wants to win and it wants to be right. To shift out of the ego state, you'll need to identify what you were getting out of telling yourself that story and whether or not the payoff is still worth it. What was the payoff? And what is it costing you now? So what was the payoff for telling myself the story that I'm better than him and it's his fault that he hurt me? Well, I got to avoid feeling the pain of regret for choosing him, for not setting boundaries when I realized it wasn't aligned, and I got to avoid feeling the pain and helplessness from childhood that was still unresolved, where that pattern originated, because at that time I had to go along for the ride. There was no way out. I also got to avoid the fear of responsibility of using my adult agency and willpower to make decisions. I got to avoid seeing where pride and lust misled me into situations that weren't aligned with my values, because I didn't want to humble myself, to repent, to renounce those demons, and to get my desires in order. So what is it costing me? Well, that pattern was costing me my peace, my emotional well-being, my freedom, the energy that I could have been using to focus on healing and creating. It was costing me all the time that I spent ruminating about it and sitting in that negative energy. It was costing me the opportunity to attract new experiences that are aligned with what I want. It was costing me the ability to serve others through living my purpose. So then you can ask yourself, does the cost now outweigh the benefits? If so, then you're ready to move on to the next level. The higher self. This is your essence, the part of you that's closest to God and sees the higher purpose through the pain without bypassing it or getting stuck in the blame. It's the part of you that's already whole. It's coming from a place that's not about a belief, an idea, or a philosophy to defend. It's a knowing that's felt both in the body and spirit at the same time. Common resonance that you might feel through the higher self: inner peace, knowing, and stillness. There's no desire to argue, explain, rationalize, or prove anything. To shift into the higher self perspective, recognize what you learned from the painful experience so you can continue to develop those aspects of your essence. This isn't about learning stances of defensiveness. That would be an ego story. The higher self already knows how that challenge was an opportunity for transformation and personal evolution. What did you learn from the experience? So, for example, from that painful experience, I learned more about wisdom, strength, resilience, temperance, courage, freedom, discernment, authenticity, cleanliness, self-discipline, faith, humility, truthfulness, and thankfulness. This is what we want to grow in our life. This is what is going to serve us in all aspects of our life and relationships, not that old story of victimhood. What if you stay in the blame? It's okay if you're not ready to move past the victimhood and blame yet, but there is a tremendous cost, and it will only get worse over time. The blame is robbing you of abundance. Blaming is a state of fear, scarcity, and lack. It causes us to focus on the money we don't have, the love and connections we don't have, the opportunities we don't have, the peace and joy we don't have, or anything else that we don't have. Over time, the state of lack leads to poverty, financially, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. Poverty is always the result of spiritual warfare. Yet the answer isn't to simply blame and battle what's out there. It's to look within and root out our own thoughts and behaviors that are leading us away from God, our essence, our abundance, and the divine mission that we were entrusted to carry out. The blame is robbing you of your purpose. When we're focused on the blame, we're not in our power, and we're not aligned with our destiny and purpose. When we blame ourselves or others, we're feeding our power and life force energy to the darkness. The darkness loves when we're in a state of blame because it means we're living in powerlessness, helplessness, lack, scarcity, and poverty. When we argue with demons, we only strengthen the darkness by giving away our power. People may mean harm and bring evil into our lives and our world. Sometimes people don't mean to hurt us, yet we end up feeling hurt and we blame them for it. It's that very pain that can either lead to our self-destruction or our purpose. When you transmute your pain into purpose, you can bless others with your wisdom. The pain that happened to you can be used to serve others. That's why it happened. Not to punish you, not because you deserved it, not because something is wrong with you, but because it was your immersion training to discover your purpose, so you could transmute the wound into medicine that you share with others. Blaming helps us avoid feeling the pain of the wound, which means we can't see the medicine, which means we also can't step into our purpose, and that means we're missing the opportunity to help the people who could be served through our wisdom. The blame is robbing you of your energy. When we get stuck in the ruminations over who or what we're blaming and what they did, over time, that turns into resentment and grudges. It's normal to feel resentful when we've been harmed, yet holding on to that drains our energy. Holding resentments and grudges is like being voluntarily chained to what hurt you and carrying that weight around. It's exhausting. That's why clearing resentments is so important for unleashing your energy from the past and taking your power back. What resentments are you still carrying? Maybe you're thinking, I don't have any resentments. I said the same thing a couple years ago when someone asked me. But once I got more honest with myself, I discovered I actually had a lot of resentments. I just didn't realize it because my heart had become hardened from carrying the unresolved pain of the past and seeing that pain repeat so many times. I had developed a shell of toughness and an armor of defensiveness in order to survive, but underneath that was the tender resentment. As I started to clear the resentments with the theta healing technique, more and more energy became available for me to use for creative purposes. I felt so much lighter. My heart softened and I was able to forgive people who hurt me. That doesn't mean I reconciled all of those relationships, but the forgiveness was part of the process of liberating myself from the heavy chains of the past. When we release resentments, we release ourselves from the obligation of carrying the stuff that never belonged to us, but we were tricked into holding. If you want to shift out of the blaming, work on releasing resentments. As resentments build up, we're more likely to project instead of dissolving the blame. Projection is a survival strategy. Projection is often the mirror we mistake for a window. We project through blame when we aren't meeting our own unmet needs or exercising our own agency. When we don't know how to protect the little inner child inside us, we look for a villain to blame or someone else to be responsible to fix it for us. Inner child reclamation work, layer by layer, leads to integration and the ability to meet our own needs, including the ones that were never met in childhood, instead of looking for someone else to rescue us or blaming someone else for not meeting our needs. Before I'd done this deeper inner work, I'd named my mother as the villain in my story to protect the terrified and hurt child inside me. I decided it was all her fault, and that message resonated with a lot of people who were also in the victim consciousness. While my mom was responsible for her actions and inactions, blaming her didn't resolve anything for me. It didn't lead to healing. It didn't help me create healthy connections in my life. It didn't bring me peace, joy, or a sense of aliveness. It didn't help me connect with my essence. It only led to resentments building up under the surface, more hardening of my heart, and more experiences of feeling like a victim of others. As adults, it's our opportunity to become responsible stewards of our lives. One of the most important places is to start with the inner child. That's where your nervous system got programmed and calibrated, and that's where you can reprogram and reset it. But most people would rather avoid that inner work, thinking the answer is to just meet a person with a secure emotional attachment who changes everything for you. That's a rescue fantasy. And it doesn't work that way because we're living in a world of children with unmet needs inside adult bodies. And when we date and enter into relationships just looking to have our needs met, that leads to volatile and disappointing relationships, which only reinforce the painful past. Another situation or relationship ends and we return to the same old blame story. Nothing changes, but it does get worse. When we hear about projection, we often think it means people are accusing you of what they're doing, and that can happen. But most of the time, projection is less of an accusation and more of a protective stance. It's like the psyche's way of diverting attention from a wound too tender to touch, especially when the inner child still feels alone and abandoned, not believed, seen, heard, or safe to feel. The ego creates an external story so the nervous system doesn't have to relive the internal one. Projection is temporarily relieving, yet it keeps us in the loop of victimhood. Because naming the villain is easier than naming the grief. Blaming the mirror is safer than witnessing the reflection. Projection isn't the enemy. It's an inner messenger disguised as someone else. It's not a psychological flaw, but a survival strategy when the emotional charge exceeds the capacity for containment. The body seeks another vessel to discharge that energy. Projection is the nervous system's attempt to outsource what we don't know how to meet yet. Projection tries to expel the feeling onto another, but midwifing the emotion welcomes the energy home, allowing it to be seen, held, and transmuted without blame or exile. To midwife the emotion is to stay present with the painful contractions of the soul's memory, not to fix it or flee from it, but to breathe deeply with what arises at that threshold so that something new can emerge. Where blame dissolves into presence. Blame gave your pain a face, but it never gave it freedom. And when the story no longer needs a villain, you can finally set it down, not to forget the learning, but to remember who you are without the weight of the pain and the distortions of the story. It's the process of softening the sharp edges where blame once calcified pain into rigidity and hardness that made you feel safe. Here are some gentle ways you can start to invite yourself to shift out of the blame if you'd like to. As soon as you notice your self-talk telling a story of blame, redirect your focus to self-honesty by asking, what part of this external conflict reflects something unhealed in me? The outer world mirrors the inner. Noticing that connection between the inner and outer isn't about blaming or judging ourselves for what happened or what's happening. It's an invitation inward because that's the part that's most difficult to see. Next, you can dig another layer deeper by asking, what part of me chose this situation or relationship? And what was it looking for? This inquiry can lead us to witness where blame is a placeholder for old grief, unmet needs, and disordered desires. It creates an invitation to stop centering the other person or group of people so you can restore your agency. It's the start of allowing coherence to return, not through resolving the conflict externally, but through releasing the past emotional residue that resonates with the conflict, which you didn't realize you were carrying. You can create this sacred pause anytime you notice your mind go towards stories of blame. That will help you start retraining your mind to dissolve the origin of the pain internally. If I couldn't blame, what would I feel? And what would I do differently today? When the energy that used to be used for blaming is no longer projected outward, it becomes inwardly available again for presence, self-awareness, self-honesty, healing, liberation, and creativity. You'll see how the miracles, blessings, and deep shifts in your life and relationships happen when you do the inner work instead of defaulting into the victimhood. And this is a constant work in progress, especially when we've grown up through traumas. Left unresolved, the blame will only continue to create more resistance, friction, frustration, and pain in your life and relationships. Turning inward means turning toward those tender parts that are waiting for your arrival so they can be met and re-emerge as something new. The next episode in this mini-series is on denial and bypassing. Not all silence is peace, and not all short-term peace is peace in the long run. Sometimes it's a form of self-protection, the quiet of what we refuse to feel, what we avoid because it's too much, and that kind of silence becomes a heavy weight. The upcoming episode is an invitation into the hidden room of the psyche, where denial reveals itself as the shadow of the sacred truth. I'll invite you to explore the edge of your awareness, and perhaps to lean in a bit more, if you want to, opening the door to what truth am I avoiding because it would change everything. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone who's ready to go deeper, beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. If you'd like to have the opportunity to work privately with me, and you're in that small percentage of people ready to leave behind the old stories of victimhood so you can liberate yourself and thrive, click the link to work with me in the show notes. I have an epic 3-month transformational journey called Becoming You for those who want a guide to walk with you into your own inner alchemy of wounds into medicine, embodying your purpose and leading with light. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are, because the world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You're not the wound. You are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration Podcast. You're not broken. You're not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour. It was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom that your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.